For 10,000 years, the Valdoran Empire had swept across the galaxy like a cosmic storm, crushing civilizations beneath their technological superiority. Their quantum phase weaponry could dissolve matter at the molecular level. Their ships moved faster than light itself seemed possible. Every species they encountered either knelt in submission or was reduced to cosmic dust. Until they met humanity. The day the first human vessel appeared on their sensors, veteran Valdoran commanders laughed. A single primitive craft built from what appeared to be scavenged metal and outdated fusion technology. It should have been vaporized in seconds. Instead, it did something that defied every law of physics the Empire understood. Something that made their most advanced AI systems crash trying to calculate the mathematics behind it. Something that turned their greatest fleet admiral's scales pale with terror as he whispered the words that would echo throughout the Empire. This is impossible. What the Valdorans didn't know was that humanity had learned to do something no other species in the galaxy had ever conceived of. They had weaponized the impossible itself. Admiral Zexthara stood on the command bridge of the Valdoran dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his forearms folded behind his back as he watched the tactical display. The holographic projection showed their fleet of 300 vessels arranged in perfect formation, each ship a masterpiece of Valdoran engineering that could reduce a planet to ash in minutes. This was supposed to be another routine conquest, another primitive species to add to the Empire's vast collection of subjugated worlds. The target system contained a small blue-green planet that the scouts had reported as inhabited by a bipedal species calling themselves humans. Their technology appeared laughably primitive compared to Valdoran standards. No quantum shielding, no phase displacement drives, no molecular disruptors. The initial probe data suggested they were still using chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons. It would be like crushing insects. "Admiral," reported his sensor officer, Lieutenant Kexvar. "We are receiving a transmission from the third planet." Zexthara's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Already? Most species wait until we demonstrate our superiority. What are they saying?" The translation matrix hummed to life, and a clear voice filled the bridge. The tone was calm, almost conversational, completely lacking the terror that usually marked first contact with the Empire. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You are entering Earth's territorial space without authorization. State your intentions or withdraw immediately." A ripple of clicks and hisses echoed through the bridge as the Valdoran crew expressed their amusement. The audacity of these creatures was almost entertaining. Zexthara allowed himself a brief rumble of laughter before responding. "Primitive creatures of the Third World, I am Admiral Zexthara of the Valdoran Empire. Your system now belongs to us. Surrender unconditionally, and your species will be granted the privilege of serving the Empire. Resist, and you will share the fate of the countless civilizations that dared defy us." There was a pause before the human responded. When the voice returned, it carried what sounded almost like amusement. "Admiral Zexthara, I appreciate the dramatic introduction, but I'm afraid we'll have to decline your generous offer. You have 30 minutes to leave our system voluntarily." The bridge fell silent. In 10,000 years of conquest, no species had ever responded to an imperial ultimatum with such casual dismissal. Zexthara felt his combat instinct stirring. The familiar rush that came before a particularly satisfying victory. "Sensor sweep," he ordered. "Show me their pathetic defenses." The tactical display updated, revealing the human disposition. Kexvar's voice cracked slightly as he read the results. "Admiral, we are detecting approximately 50 vessels positioned throughout the system. Composition appears to be primarily iron and titanium alloys, with some unknown composite materials. No energy signatures matching any known weapon systems. No shielding technologies detected. 50 ships against 300? Zexthara's laugh was a harsh grinding sound. They are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Prepare the quantum disruptors. We will make their destruction swift as a lesson to any other primitives watching. But as the minutes ticked by, something strange began to appear on the sensors. The human ships weren't retreating or forming defensive positions. Instead, they were moving into what appeared to be completely random formations scattered throughout the asteroid belt that ringed their system. "What are they doing?" demanded Zexthara. Unknown, Admiral. Their movement patterns make no tactical sense. They appear to be positioning themselves among the asteroids with no regard for strategic advantage or defensive positioning. The 30-minute deadline approached, and Zexthara watched with growing anticipation as the final seconds counted down. When the timer reached 0, he opened a channel to the human ship. "Your time is up, primitives. Observe the price of defying the Empire." He gestured to his weapons officer. "Target their largest vessel. Full quantum disruptor array. Show them what real power looks like." The Eternal Dominion hummed as its primary weapons charged. The quantum disruptors were the crown jewel of Valderan military technology, capable of disrupting the molecular bonds of any known material. The energy beam that lanced out from the Dreadnought's main gun could have punched through a moon. It struck the human flagship dead center, a brilliant blue-white lance of annihilation that should have reduced the primitive craft to its component atoms. Instead, the impossible happened. The quantum disruptor beam struck the human ship and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected, not dispersed. It struck the hull and remained there, frozen in space like a photograph of destruction. The beam hung in the void, motionless, while the human ship continued on its course completely unaffected. "What?" Zexthara's voice trailed off as he stared at the tactical display. "Kexvar, explain this malfunction." "Admiral, all weapon systems are functioning normally. The quantum disruptor fired at full power and achieved target lock, but the beam appears to have been somehow neutralized upon contact with the enemy vessel." "That's impossible! No known technology can stop a quantum disruptor." Even as he spoke, more impossibilities began manifesting across the battlefield. The human ships were beginning their counterattack, and what Zexthara witnessed defied every principle of physics he understood. One human vessel fired what appeared to be a simple kinetic projectile, a chunk of metal accelerated by conventional chemical propulsion. But as the projectile traveled through space, it began to behave in ways that made the Valderan sensor systems emit error warnings. The projectile split into multiple copies of itself, each one identical down to the atomic level. Then those copies split again and again, until a single shot had become a swarm of thousands of identical projectiles, all carrying the same kinetic energy as the original. The impossible swarm struck a Valderan cruiser's quantum shields and tore through them as if they were made of paper. The kinetic energy that should have been contained within a single projectile somehow existed in every copy simultaneously, delivering a devastating impact that cracked the cruiser's hull and sent it tumbling through space. "Admiral!" Kexvar's voice was rising in pitch as panic crept in. "The energy readings from that impact are impossible. The projectiles are violating conservation of energy. Our physics models can't account for what we're observing." But the impossibilities were just beginning. Another human ship launched what appeared to be a simple fusion torpedo, but as it approached its target, the weapon began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The Valderan point defense systems locked onto the torpedo and fired, striking it dead on with enough force to vaporize it completely. The torpedo was indeed vaporized, but it was also not vaporized. It existed in both states at once, continuing its approach even as the debris from its destruction scattered through space. When it reached its target, both the existing torpedo and the non-existing torpedo exploded, creating a fusion detonation that somehow generated twice the energy it should have been capable of. "This is impossible!" Zexthara roared as another of his ships took impossible damage from impossible weapons. "No technology can violate the fundamental laws of physics." The communication channel crackled to life, and Captain Chen's calm voice filled the bridge again. "Admiral Zexthara, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. What are you talking about? What technology is this? What sorcery allows you to ignore the laws of physics?" There was genuine amusement in the human's voice when she responded. "Sorcery, Admiral? This isn't sorcery. This is engineering. Human engineering. We learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't actually care what you think is impossible." As if to emphasize the point, another human weapon fired. This one appeared to be a simple laser, but as it traveled through space, it began to bend and twist in ways that light should never move. The beam curved around a Valderan destroyer's shields, struck the ship from behind, then somehow traveled backward in time to strike the same ship again before the first hit had landed. The destroyer was hit twice by the same laser beam, creating a temporal paradox that made the Valderan computers crash trying to process the data. Zexthera watched in growing horror as his fleet, the most advanced military force in the known galaxy, was being systematically dismantled by weapons that operated on principles that shouldn't exist. His quantum phase armor was being penetrated by kinetic weapons that multiplied their own mass at the moment of impact. His faster-than-light drives were being disrupted by electromagnetic pulses that somehow traveled faster than the ships they were targeting. His energy shields were being drained by weapons that created energy from nothing, violating thermodynamics with casual efficiency. "Retreat!" he finally ordered, his voice cracking with strain. "All ships, fall back to safe distance." But even retreat proved impossible. As his ships attempted to engage their quantum drives to escape, they found their own technology turned against them. The humans had somehow created weapons that made retreat itself impossible by altering the local laws of physics. Valderan ships that tried to jump to hyperspace found themselves arriving at their departure point. Others discovered that their faster-than-light drives were running in reverse, causing them to age backward through time while remaining in the same location. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as something struck its hull. Not a weapon, but a transmission. Data packets that carried impossible information. Numbers that divided by zero and got meaningful results. Mathematical equations that proved contradictory statements were both true and false simultaneously. The ship's computer core began emitting alarming sounds as it tried to process the impossible data. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as fundamental systems began to malfunction, not from damage, but from being forced to operate on mathematical principles that violated logic itself. "Admiral!" Kexvar's voice was merely a scream. "The humans are transmitting pure paradox. Our computer systems can't process information that contradicts itself. The ship's AI is experiencing critical logic failures." Through the chaos, Captain Chen's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Admiral, I strongly suggest you reconsider your position. What you're seeing is just a small demonstration of human military philosophy. We've had a saying for a long time. The difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. We've been working on this particular problem for about 300 years now." "What problem?" Zexthara managed to gasp as he watched another of his ships fold itself inside out in response to a weapon that seemed to fire pure geometric impossibility. "The problem of how to win a war against an enemy with superior technology and resources," Chen replied. "We solved it by learning to weaponize impossibility itself. Our ancestors discovered that the universe is far more flexible than most species assume. Physical laws aren't actually laws. They're more like suggestions, and humans have never been very good at following suggestions." The tactical display now showed a battlefield that looked more like an abstract art piece than a space combat zone. Valderan's ships were caught in temporal loops, trapped in recursive explosions that reset themselves every few seconds. Others were being attacked by their own weapons, which had been convinced by human logic bombs that their targets were actually behind them, in a direction that didn't exist. One unfortunate cruiser had been hit by a weapon that made its atoms forget how to maintain nuclear bonds, causing the ship to slowly dissolve into component particles, while its crew experienced the process in reverse chronological order. Zexthara realized with mounting dread that this wasn't just a military defeat. This was something far worse. This was a fundamental challenge to everything the Valderan Empire understood about reality itself. Their entire technological superiority was built on advanced understanding of physics, but the humans seemed to have transcended physics entirely. "How?" he whispered, more to himself than to the human captain. "How is any of this possible?" Captain Chen's response would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. "Admiral, humans have been making the impossible possible since we first decided to leave the trees. We made fire from rocks, turned sand into computers, and convinced metal to fly. When we reached for the stars and found them full of species who thought they understood the rules of the universe, we did what humans do best." There was a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity before she continued. "We changed the rules." The transmission ended, leaving Zexthara staring at a battlefield where the remnants of his once mighty fleet drifted helplessly, victim to weapons that had rewritten the fundamental constants of local spacetime to make Valdoran technology inoperable. For the first time in 10,000 years of conquest, the Valdoran Empire faced a truth that would shake their civilization to its core. They were no longer the most dangerous force in the galaxy. That distinction now belonged to a species of bipedal mammals who had looked at the impossible and decided it was merely another engineering problem to be solved. The age of human impossibility had begun. 3 weeks after the disastrous first contact with humanity, the Valdoran High Command convened on their capital world of Zexthara Prime. The massive chamber, carved from a single crystal formation deep beneath the planet's surface, had witnessed the planning of countless conquests over 10 millennia. Never before had it hosted a gathering to discuss how an entire Imperial fleet had been neutralized without losing a single enemy vessel. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore, oldest and most experienced of the Valdoran military leaders, stood before the assembled war council. His ancient scales bore the scars of 100 battles, and his 4 eyes had witnessed the subjugation of entire galactic sectors. Now those same eyes reflected something never before seen in Valdoran leadership: uncertainty. "Report," he commanded, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. Admiral Zexthara stepped forward, his movements still shaky from what the medical corps had termed impossibility trauma. The psychological condition was new to Valdoran medicine. "Supreme Chancellor, the enemy we face defies all conventional analysis. The species calling themselves humans have developed weaponry that operates outside known physics. Our quantum disruptors are ineffective. Our phase shields offer no protection. Our fastest ships cannot escape weapons that arrive before they are fired." A ripple of disturbed clicks echoed through the chamber. Senior General Krafen, veteran of the siege of the Christech Consortium, leaned forward with his war-scarred mandibles clicking in agitation. "You speak of impossibilities, Admiral. In 50 years of conquest, I have seen every form of advanced technology. Energy beings, sentient machines, species that manipulate gravity itself. All fell before Imperial might. What makes these humans different?" Zexthara activated the holographic display at the chamber's center. The recording showed the human weapon that had struck his flagship, the quantum disruptor beam, frozen in space like a sculpture of destruction. "This, General, this beam carries enough energy to destroy a small moon. It struck the human vessel and simply stopped, not deflected by shields, not absorbed by advanced materials. It struck and became motionless, as if the concept of energy transfer had been temporarily suspended." The assembled commanders studied the image in silence. Finally, Chief Engineer Korthax spoke, his technical expertise carrying weight even in military circles. "Could they have developed some form of stasis field technology? A localized time dilation effect?" "Negative," Zexthara replied. "Our temporal sensors detected no chronoton emissions, no tachyon disruptions, none of the signatures associated with time manipulation. According to our instruments, time flowed normally throughout the engagement. The humans appear to have found a way to make energy itself selectively obey different rules. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore processed this information with the patience of millennia. Show us more of their weapons." The holographic display shifted, showing the kinetic projectile that had split into thousands of identical copies. The recording played the moment of impact, where each copy delivered the full kinetic energy of the original, multiplying destruction by factors that made their physicists weep. "Conservation of energy," whispered Chief Scientist Yextal, her voice filled with academic horror. "They have found a way to violate conservation of energy. This should collapse local spacetime, create paradoxes that destroy reality itself." "Yet reality remains intact," observed General Krathven grimly, "which suggests their mastery extends beyond mere weapon technology. They are somehow maintaining universal stability while selectively ignoring the laws that govern it." The next recording showed the fusion torpedo that had been simultaneously destroyed and not destroyed, existing in quantum superposition until the moment of impact. The explosion that followed registered energy readings that exceeded the theoretical maximum output of the weapon's fuel supply by a factor of 3. "Quantum mechanics," breathed Yextal. "They are applying macroscopic quantum effects to military hardware. But the mathematics required to maintain coherent superposition at that scale." She paused, running complex calculations on her personal data pad. The computational power needed would require a computer the size of a gas giant. Admiral Zixthara's laugh was bitter. Perhaps that is exactly what they have built. We no longer know the limits of their capabilities. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore raised one of his 4 arms for silence. Enough speculation. What intelligence have we gathered about their homeworld and military infrastructure? The holographic display shifted to show long-range sensor data of the Sol system. The view revealed a bustling network of orbital installations, asteroid mining operations, and what appeared to be massive construction projects scattered throughout the system. Their system shows signs of extensive industrial development, reported Intelligence Coordinator Jexonol. But the construction techniques are unlike anything in our databases. They appear to be building structures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, facilities that occupy the same space while remaining distinct from each other. Explain, ordered Vexmore. Observe this orbital station above their 4th planet. The display zoomed in on what appeared to be a standard space station. Surface scans show a facility capable of housing perhaps 10,000 individuals. But deeper analysis reveals the same station somehow contains internal space equivalent to a small city. The volume of the interior exceeds the volume of the exterior by a factor of 50. General Krathbin's combat instincts flared. Hidden compartments? Compressed space technology? Negative, General. The space is genuinely larger on the inside than on the outside. They appear to have folded space-time in ways that allow them to exceed 3-dimensional geometric limitations. The implications struck the assembled commanders like a physical blow. A species that could manipulate spatial dimensions at will would have advantages in logistics, manufacturing, and population density that dwarfed any conventional military advantage. Chief Engineer Korthak studied the technical data with growing alarm. If they can manipulate interior space without affecting exterior dimensions, their ships could carry armaments and crews far exceeding their apparent size. A single human frigate might house the firepower of a dreadnought. Or worse, added Yextal. If they can selectively apply different physical laws within their expanded spaces, they could have facilities that operate on entirely different principles. Factories that violate thermodynamics to produce unlimited resources. Laboratories where impossible experiments yield impossible results. The discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication from the fleet monitoring the border sectors. Admiral Zorthex's image materialized in the chamber, his scales pale with stress. Supreme Chancellor, we have a situation. The humans have launched what appears to be a retaliatory strike. Retaliatory? We have not attacked their homeworld. No, sir. They are retaliating for the initial incursion 3 weeks ago. But they are not attacking our border fleets. They are attacking our supply convoys in the Zirian sector, 1,200 light-years from human space. The assembled council exchanged glances of confusion. The Zirian sector was deep within Imperial territory, protected by sensor networks and patrol fleets. No enemy force should be able to penetrate that far without detection. How did they reach Zarian without triggering our early warning systems? Demanded General Krathovan. Sir, that's the problem. They didn't reach Zirian. According to our tracking stations, no human vessels have left their system. Yet our convoys are under attack by confirmed human forces. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Show us the attack footage. The holographic display revealed a scene that challenged sanity itself. Human warships were engaged in combat with Valderon supply convoys, but the human ships appeared to be fighting from inside the Valderon vessels. The enemy ships were somehow occupying the same physical space as the supply ships while remaining distinct entities. The human vessels fired their impossible weapons from within the cargo holds of the Valderan freighters, their shots passing through Imperial hull plating as if it didn't exist. Meanwhile, return fire from Valderan escorts passed harmlessly through the human ships, unable to affect targets that existed in the same location, but apparently not the same dimension. This is beyond impossible, whispered Yextal. They are somehow projecting their vessels across interstellar distances while maintaining the ability to interact selectively with our ships. The amount of energy required for such projection should be detectable across half the galaxy. Perhaps, said a new voice, you are thinking about this problem in entirely the wrong way. The assembled council turned to see Grand Strategist Nexara, the Empire's most brilliant military theorist, emerging from the shadows at the chamber's edge. The ancient Valdoran's presence commanded instant respect, her tactical genius having shaped imperial doctrine for centuries. "Explain," ordered Supreme Chancellor Vexmore. "We are analyzing human capabilities using our understanding of physics and technology. But what if their approach to these problems is fundamentally different from ours? What if they have not advanced beyond our technology, but have instead chosen to ignore the limitations that constrain our thinking?" General Krathvin's mandibles clicked impatiently. "You speak in riddle, strategist. How does one ignore physical limitations?" "Consider our own history," Nixara replied calmly. "For millennia before we developed spaceflight, we believed that faster-than-light travel was impossible. The mathematics of our time proved conclusively that no object could exceed light speed. We were correct, within the framework of our understanding. But we eventually learned to circumvent that limitation by folding space, rather than moving through it." She gestured to the recordings of human weapons. What if humans have taken this concept further? Instead of advancing their technology to overcome limitations, they have learned to convince the universe that the limitations do not apply to them. "That's absurd," protested Chief Engineer Korthax. "Physical laws are constants. They cannot be negotiated with or convinced. Can they not?" Nexara's ancient eyes held a gleam of terrible understanding. "We have observed human weapons that violate conservation of energy, manipulate probability, and exist in quantum superposition at macroscopic scales. We have seen their ships occupy the same space as our vessels while remaining distinct. We have witnessed their projectiles travel backward in time to strike targets before being fired." She paused, allowing the implications to settle over the council. "What if humans have discovered that physical laws are not immutable constants, but rather consensual agreements? What if their technology operates by convincing local reality to operate according to different rules?" The chamber fell silent as the assembled leaders contemplated this possibility. If humans had learned to negotiate with reality itself, then the Empire faced an enemy whose potential capabilities were literally unlimited. The silence was broken by another urgent transmission. This time it was Admiral Torthek from the Core Defense Fleet, his image wavering with interference that suggested impossible energies. "Supreme Chancellor, the humans have somehow infiltrated our primary shipyards above Valdor Prime." "But sir, they're not destroying our facilities. They're improving them." "Improving them?" Vexmore's voice carried dangerous undertones. "Yes, sir. Human engineering teams are upgrading our construction bays with impossible technologies. They've increased our shipbuilding capacity by 3,000% while reducing construction time to minutes instead of months. Our own facilities are now producing vessels that exceed our design specifications." The absurdity of the situation struck the council like a physical blow. "An enemy that infiltrated your territory not to destroy your capabilities, but to improve them beyond all reasonable limits." "Sir," Admiral Torthek continued, "the humans have left a message for us. They say they're demonstrating their philosophy of warfare. They claim that the best way to defeat an enemy is to make them so advanced that they can no longer function within their own understanding of reality." Grand Strategist Nexara nodded slowly, her worst fears confirmed. "Cognitive warfare," she whispered. "They are not trying to destroy us militarily. They are trying to destroy us conceptually. By forcing us to confront technologies that violate our understanding of physics, they are undermining our entire worldview." "To what end?" demanded General Krathvin. "To force us to evolve or collapse. Either we must expand our thinking to accommodate impossibilities, which would fundamentally change what it means to be Valdoran, or we must reject the evidence of our senses and become a civilization in denial of observable reality." Supreme Chancellor Vexmore understood the terrible genius of the human strategy. The Empire's strength had always been its technological superiority and logical approach to conquest, but humans had found a way to turn that strength into weakness by making logic itself unreliable. "Options?" he asked grimly. "Limited," Nexara admitted. "We could attempt to negotiate, but we have nothing to offer a species that can rewrite physics at will. We could retreat to the galactic core and hope they lose interest, but they have already demonstrated the ability to project force across any distance. Or we could attempt to learn from them, to expand our understanding of reality to match theirs. But that path leads to the end of the Valdoran Empire as we know it. As if summoned by their discussion of negotiation, the chamber's communication array activated on its own. Captain Chen's calm voice filled the crystal space, her words carrying impossible clarity across impossible distances. Chancellor Vexmore, my name is Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We need to talk. The Supreme Chancellor found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. How are you communicating across this distance without detectable transmission? We asked the distance to be smaller, Chen replied matter-of-factly. It agreed. Now, about this war you've started, we'd like to offer you a choice. What choice? You can learn to coexist with species whose approach to reality differs from yours, or you can continue believing that your way is the only way. But if you choose the latter, we'll be forced to continue our demonstration of alternative possibilities. And if we choose coexistence, then we'll teach you some very interesting things about the universe you thought you understood. Fair warning, though, once you see reality from a human perspective, you can never go back to thinking the impossible is actually impossible. As the transmission ended, Supreme Chancellor Vexmore realized that the Valdoran Empire faced the most critical decision in its 10,000-year history. They could cling to their understanding of physics and face an enemy that could violate those physics at will, or they could step into a larger universe where humans had already proven that the impossible was simply another word for engineering challenge. The age of certainty was ending, and the age of human impossibility was just beginning. 6 months after first contact, the galaxy had become a place that defied every assumption the Valdoran Empire had held about reality. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore stood in what had once been the Empire's most secure military facility, watching human engineers casually violate the laws of physics while teaching Valdoran scientists to do the same. The transformation had been gradual at first, then accelerating beyond all comprehension. It began when Captain Chen's promised interesting things arrived in the form of human technical advisors who materialized aboard Valdoran ships without using transporters, traveling through what they cheerfully called the spaces between spaces. Dr. Marcus Webb, the human physicist assigned to the Valdoran Science Academy, was currently explaining to a room full of bewildered Valdoran researchers why their fundamental understanding of mathematics was unnecessarily limiting. The problem, Webb said, gesturing to an equation that somehow solved itself as he wrote it on the holographic display, is that you've been thinking of mathematics as a description of reality. But math isn't descriptive. It's prescriptive. When you write an equation, you're not discovering what the universe does. You're telling it what you want it to do. Chief Scientist Yextal, her scales now permanently pale from months of exposure to impossible concepts, raised a trembling limb. Dr. Webb. That equation you just wrote divides by 0 and produces a finite result. This is mathematically impossible. Only if you accept the arbitrary rule that division by 0 is undefined. Webb replied with a smile that Valdorans had learned to fear. But who made that rule? Why should we let mathematics limit our options? Humans learned centuries ago that the universe is much more cooperative than most species assume. You just have to ask it nicely. As if to demonstrate, Webb picked up a piece of Valdoran quantum crystal, a material so hard it could only be shaped by molecular disruptors, and folded it into an origami crane using nothing but his bare hands. The crystal, despite maintaining all of its quantum properties, bent and creased like paper. You see, Webb continued as several Valdoran scientists fainted, your crystal is incredibly hard because it believes it should be. But I asked it to be temporarily soft for artistic purposes. It was happy to oblige. The origami crane flapped its wings and flew around the room, still composed of quantum crystal that could theoretically cut through a starship hull, but now behaving like a living creature made of folded paper. In another section of the facility, human military advisor Colonel James Morrison was demonstrating advanced human combat techniques to a group of Valdoran officers. The lesson involved what Morrison casually referred to as aggressive negotiation with local space-time. The key to human military doctrine, Morrison explained while standing upside down on the ceiling without any visible means of support, is understanding that the universe doesn't actually care about the rules you think it follows. Gravity keeps me on the ground because I expect it to. But right now I'm having a conversation with local gravitational fields about alternative arrangements. Admiral Zexthara, whose scales had developed a permanent nervous twitch since his encounter with human weapons, watched in fascination as Morrison demonstrated a human sidearm. The weapon appeared to be a simple kinetic pistol, but when Morrison fired it at a target, the bullet traveled backward in time, struck the target, then returned to the present to strike it again, creating a double impact from a single shot. "How?" Zexthera whispered. "Simple temporal negotiation," Morrison replied. "I asked the bullet if it would mind taking a quick trip to the recent past to double its effectiveness. Time travel is actually quite easy, once you stop thinking of causality as a chain of events and start thinking of it as a flexible suggestion." But the paradoxes. What paradoxes? The bullet went back in time and shot the same target it was going to shoot anyway. No contradiction, no problem. The universe is remarkably good at resolving apparent paradoxes if you give it credit for being smarter than your logical frameworks. Meanwhile, in the facilities engineering section, human construction crews were demonstrating what they called collaborative architecture with Valderon materials. The humans had apparently convinced the facility's quantum-bonded durasteel to reconfigure itself into impossible geometries, creating rooms that were larger on the inside than on the outside, corridors that led to destinations that couldn't possibly fit within the building's exterior dimensions, and storage areas that somehow contained infinite space while occupying finite volume. Engineer Sarah Martinez, who had been leading the construction efforts, was explaining the process to a group of increasingly overwhelmed Valdoran technicians. "The trick," she said while walking through a wall that had agreed to let her pass, "is understanding that physical objects are a lot more flexible than most species give them credit for. This wall isn't actually solid, it's just a collection of atoms that have agreed to maintain a specific formation. I asked them if they'd mind temporarily stepping aside, and they were perfectly willing to accommodate." She gestured to a room that was clearly too large for the building it was contained within. Same principle with spatial dimensions. The room wanted to be bigger. The building was happy to provide extra interior space, and the universe found a way to make everyone happy without violating conservation of volume. "But where does the extra space come from?" asked Chief Engineer Korthax, his voice strained from months of watching human engineers casually violate every principle he'd spent his career learning. "From the spaces between spaces," Martinez replied, as if this explained everything. "There's actually a lot more room in the universe than most people realize. It's just usually organized differently. We asked for some of that extra room to be reorganized inside your building instead of scattered around empty space between galaxies." The philosophical implications of human engineering were proving as devastating to Valderon civilization as their military capabilities. Grand strategist Nexara had spent months trying to understand the human approach to problem-solving, and her conclusions were reshaping Imperial strategic doctrine from the ground up. Her latest report to the High Command read like the fevered dream of a mad prophet. Human military philosophy is based on the principle that reality is negotiable. They do not see physical laws as constraints to be worked around, but as starting positions for discussion. When they encounter a problem that appears impossible to solve, they do not seek to discover a solution within existing parameters. Instead, they convince the universe to change the parameters. This approach extends to all aspects of their civilization. Human agriculture doesn't simply grow crops in suitable soil, it persuades unsuitable soil to become fertile. Human medicine doesn't just treat diseases, it convinces the diseases to cure themselves. Human transportation doesn't overcome the limitation of distance, it asks distance to be less inconvenient. Most disturbing of all, human education doesn't teach students to accept the limits of their knowledge, it teaches them to expand the limits of what can be known. The transformation of Valderan society was accelerating beyond all attempts to control or understand it. Young Valdorans who had been exposed to human thinking were beginning to exhibit impossible abilities themselves. Student engineer Zoxthar had recently convinced a broken quantum drive to repair itself by explaining to it how much more interesting it would be if it worked properly. Cadet navigator Wexenol had discovered she could shorten interstellar distances by politely asking space to be more accommodating during long voyages. Perhaps most unsettling of all, these new abilities seemed to be contagious. Valdorans who worked closely with humans gradually developed their own capacity for impossible feats, as if the human approach to reality was spreading through direct exposure. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore found himself facing the most profound crisis in Valdoran history. Not a military defeat or political upheaval, but a fundamental transformation of what it meant to be Valdoran. The rigid, logical approach to existence that had defined their species for millions of years was dissolving under the influence of human philosophy. The crisis came to a head during what would later be called the Conference of Impossible Truths. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered to witness a demonstration of human diplomatic techniques, which Captain Chen had promised would resolve some long-standing conflicts in ways that satisfy everyone involved. The demonstration involved the centuries-old territorial dispute between the crystalline hegemony and the gas giant collective, two species whose homeworlds occupied the same star system but who had fundamentally incompatible environmental needs. The crystallines required the intense radiation of close solar proximity, while the gas giant beings needed the cold, chemical-rich environment of the outer system. For 800 years, the two species had fought for control of the system, each believing that their survival depended on denying the other access to the resources they needed. Dozens of imperial mediations had failed because the problem appeared to have no solution that didn't require one species to sacrifice their essential needs. Captain Chen's solution was elegantly impossible. "The problem," she explained to the assembled delegates, "is that you're thinking of this as a zero-sum situation where one species' gain must be the other's loss. But that's only true if you accept the arbitrary limitation that a single star system can only exist in one configuration." She activated a holographic display showing the disputed system, then gestured casually. The system in the display began to change, splitting into two identical copies that occupied the same space while remaining distinct from each other. "We asked the star system if it would mind existing in two states simultaneously," Chen continued. "One optimized for crystalline life, one optimized for gas giant beings." The system was perfectly happy to accommodate both requirements. The impossible solution became reality as human engineers convinced local space-time to maintain two parallel versions of the same star system, each perfectly suited to the needs of one species, both occupying identical coordinates while never interfering with each other. "But how do they share resources?" asked the crystalline representative, his mineral structure vibrating with confusion. "They don't need to share," Chen replied. "Each species has access to their own version of the system's resources. There's no conflict because they're interacting with different instances of the same matter." "This violates conservation of mass and energy on a stellar scale," protested the gas giant delegate. "Only if you insist that mass and energy must be conserved in the traditional way," Chen answered with a smile. "We asked the universe to be more generous with its accounting. It turns out that conservation laws are more like guidelines when you're dealing with matter that exists in multiple states simultaneously." The demonstration sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. If humans could duplicate entire star systems to resolve territorial disputes, what other impossible solutions might they offer to problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia? Over the following months, human diplomatic teams spread throughout the galaxy, offering their services to resolve conflicts that had previously been considered intractable. They convinced warring species that their enemies were actually valuable allies by helping them recognize that competition and cooperation weren't mutually exclusive. They resolved resource shortages by persuading scarcity to be less limiting. They ended genetic incompatibilities between species by asking DNA to be more flexible in its expression. Each success further undermined the logical frameworks that had structured galactic civilization for millions of years. Species across the galaxy found themselves capable of achievements that should have been impossible, simply because humans had taught them that impossibility was a cultural limitation rather than a physical constraint. The final transformation came when Captain Chen made an offer that would forever change the course of galactic history. "We'd like to invite any species interested in learning human techniques to participate in what we call the Impossibility Exchange," she announced during a galaxy-wide broadcast. "We'll teach you how to negotiate with reality, how to convince the universe to be more accommodating to your needs, and how to solve problems by expanding the definition of what's possible. In return, we ask only that you share your own unique perspectives on existence. Humans have learned to make the impossible possible, but we're always interested in discovering new kinds of impossibility to make possible." The response was overwhelming. Species from across the galaxy began sending their brightest minds to study with human teachers, eager to learn techniques that could revolutionize their civilizations. The Valdoran Empire, once the galaxy's dominant power through technological superiority, became simply one of many participants in a new galactic community built on the principle that reality was infinitely more flexible than anyone had previously imagined. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore, now bearing the title of Coordinator of Impossible Projects, stood in his transformed headquarters watching Valdoran students learn to convince matter to behave in ways that would have been considered magical just months earlier. The rigid hierarchy of the Empire had dissolved into a collaborative network where species shared techniques for transcending limitations they had once considered absolute. "Do you regret the change?" asked Captain Chen, who had materialized beside him using what she called casual teleportation. Vexmore considered the question carefully. The Valdoran Empire was gone, replaced by something unrecognizably better. His people had gained capabilities that dwarfed their previous technological achievements, but they had lost the certainty that had once defined their identity. "Regret implies I wish we could return to what we were," he finally replied. "But after seeing what we could become, the idea of limiting ourselves to what we used to think was possible seems small." He gestured to a young Valdoran who was casually walking through the air, having convinced gravity that horizontal surfaces were just as valid as vertical ones. "We spent 10,000 years believing that power came from understanding the universe's rules better than other species. Humans taught us that true power comes from understanding that the universe's rules are actually just the opening position for negotiation." Captain Chen smiled, an expression that Valdorans had learned to associate with the imminent expansion of possibilities. "That's the thing about humans," she said. "We've never been very good at accepting limitations. When we encountered the speed of light, we found ways around it. When we met entropy, we convinced it to be more flexible. When we discovered the impossible, we decided to make it possible." She paused, looking out at a galaxy that was rapidly learning to transcend its previous understanding of what reality could accommodate. "And now," she continued, "we're teaching the universe that impossible is just another word for hasn't been tried yet." As Vexmore watched his transformed civilization embrace capabilities that would have been considered divine just months earlier, he realized that humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had conquered it through superior imagination, teaching every species they encountered that the universe was far more accommodating than anyone had dared to dream. The age of impossibility had truly begun, and at its heart stood a species of bipedal mammals who had looked at the fundamental laws of physics and politely asked them to be more reasonable. The galaxy would never be the same, and no one who had experienced the human perspective on reality could imagine wanting it any other way.